Every man, at some point, has looked down at his own body and wondered a version of the same question: is my penis actually the size women prefer? Not in a joking tone, not in comparison to some unrealistic scene online, but in that private moment where doubt appears without permission. What most men never hear is that women have already answered this, in real scientific studies, and the answer is far more grounded, consistent, and surprising than any cultural myth. I'm Dr. Emily Collins, urologist, and this video is about sexual health in its most practical form: how size influences comfort, stimulation, and satisfaction, what women report as ideal, and how new research reveals a range that many men fall into without even realizing it. Recently, researchers conducted one of the most precise investigations ever done on this topic. Hundreds of women were asked to evaluate size not through imagination or social pressure, but through controlled, anonymous, unbiased methods. No partners to flatter, no visual exaggerations, no external influence, just their own experience of real sex and a structured series of options to choose from. The goal was simple: identify the exact size women would sincerely classify as ideal for intercourse, not ideal to look at, not ideal for fantasy, but ideal for actual penetration, movement, and sustained pleasure. What came back from these studies wasn't vague, poetic, or evasive. Women gave a specific range, a measurable interval, a pattern that emerged again and again across age groups, relationship styles, and sexual histories. And here's what shocks most men: the size women prefer is not the extreme one men imagine. It isn't rare, it isn't oversized, and it isn't something only a tiny percentage of men have. It's a biologically compatible range, one that aligns with the internal structure of the female body and appears repeatedly in scientific results. This first part of the video has one purpose: to prepare you for the real numbers, the real anatomy, and the real truth that has been hidden behind decades of misinformation and insecurity. Before we continue, check if you're already subscribed to the channel, so you don't miss the deeper breakdowns coming next. And tell me in the comments, type science if you believe data should guide this conversation, or pressure if you think men have been misled by unrealistic expectations. If men have spent decades confused about the size women prefer, science is partly to blame. Until recently, most studies relied on questionnaires, and questionnaires fail miserably when dealing with sex. People exaggerate, minimize, or answer based on what they think they should say. So for the first time, researchers designed an experiment that bypassed imagination entirely and went straight to physical perception. Instead of asking women, "What size do you like?" they handed them standardized anatomical models. Each model had identical shape, texture, and appearance. The only differences were precise variations in length and girth. Importantly, the models carried no labels, no measurements, no clues. Participants had no idea which size they were touching. This eliminated comparison bias, social influence, and the pressure to sound politically correct. The procedure was simple: evaluate privately, select intuitively. Women were instructed to choose two things: the size they found ideal for long-term, recurring sexual encounters, the size they found ideal for one-time or casual encounters. These two categories revealed subtle differences, but the same core range appeared again and again, a range that had nothing to do with male fantasies and everything to do with the natural dimensions of the female body. But researchers didn't stop at physical models. Another team developed a 3D adjustment interface, allowing women to modify digital versions of the penis with millimeter precision. This method removed tactile cues and focused entirely on memory-based preference. The surprising part? The results matched almost exactly with the physical model tests. When two completely different methods converge, tactile evaluation and digital manipulation, the data becomes undeniably reliable. The consistency was astonishing. Women weren't picking extremes. They weren't picking anything close to the exaggerated images men compare themselves to. They were choosing sizes that allowed smooth penetration, comfortable depth, stable rhythm, and reliable Stimulation of internal sensitive zones, nothing more and nothing less. This research didn't just clarify what women prefer. It exposed how massively distorted male self-perception has become. If this level of scientific clarity is helping you rethink old assumptions, go ahead and hit the like button. It tells me this kind of content is worth expanding even further. When the researchers compiled the results from the physical models and the digital adjustments, a striking pattern emerged. Women weren't scattered across the chart. They weren't choosing unpredictable extremes. Their preferences clustered around the same interval with almost mathematical precision. To understand why, the research team shifted the focus from preference to physiology, and this is where the picture became crystal clear. The female reproductive canal is not a passive space. It expands, contracts, angles, and adapts depending on arousal, hormonal state, and muscular activity. But even with this flexibility, its functional geometry is remarkably consistent among adult women. There is a depth where stimulation feels satisfying, a depth where it becomes overwhelming, and a depth beyond which tension replaces pleasure. The ideal size women selected aligns almost perfectly with the zone that allows a penis to stimulate the anterior vaginal wall, one of the most sensitive internal regions, without colliding with the cervix or triggering protective reflexes. This wall is packed with nerve endings that respond to controlled pressure and rhythmic movement. When a penis reaches it comfortably, women describe more intense arousal, more reliable lubrication, and deeper muscle engagement. But the story doesn't end with depth. During intercourse, the vagina isn't straight, it curves upward slightly, which means certain sizes create more contact along the most responsive surfaces. A penis that is too short may fail to stimulate these regions consistently. A penis that is too long overshoots them and risks hitting areas that are not built for impact. The preferred range sits precisely where this balance is optimized. Another overlooked factor is movement. Women report that certain lengths make it easier to maintain a stable rhythm, because the motion stays inside the zone where pleasure accumulates rather than alternating between stimulation and discomfort. When the body senses discomfort, even mild, the pelvic floor tightens, lubrication decreases, and arousal drops. The ideal size avoids these physiological interruptions. In evolutionary terms, it also makes sense. Pleasurable sex promotes bonding, increases the frequency of intercourse, and reduces the risk of injury. Over generations, preference drifted toward partners whose anatomy offered reliable stimulation without harm. So when women consistently choose a specific interval, they're not being picky or superficial. They're responding to the alignment between male anatomy and the internal structure of their own bodies. Pleasure isn't random, it's anatomical precision. What made this new wave of research groundbreaking wasn't just the data itself, it was the method. For the first time, scientists designed a study in which women could express their preferences without pressure, without embarrassment, and without the silent influence of partners, culture, or comparison. The result was a clarity that past generations of men never had access to. The experiment began with one simple rule: eliminate imagination. Instead of asking women hypothetical questions, the kind that usually produce vague or socially filtered answers, researchers placed dozens of anatomical models on a long, isolated table. Each model looked identical in shape and texture. The only variable was precise measurement. Participants entered the testing room alone, with no observers, no instructions beyond evaluation, and no time limits. The atmosphere was designed to make authenticity the default. Women were encouraged to pick up the models, compare them, turn them in their hands, and make selections entirely based on instinctual recall of what actually feels good during intercourse. The anonymity of the process gave them an unusual freedom. Instead of choosing what they thought they should prefer, they chose what matched their real sexual experiences. But the most revealing part came during the second phase. After the physical evaluations, researchers conducted in-depth interviews, asking women to describe why they chose the models they did. Their responses were extraordinarily consistent. They selected sizes that allowed comfortable penetration, reliable stimulation, and a sense of control during movement, qualities rarely discussed openly, but universally felt. The third phase introduced a digital component. In a private virtual interface, women could adjust length and girth independently with granular precision. This removed tactile influence and focused purely on memory and preference. The digital choices mirrored the physical ones so closely that the researchers realized they weren't uncovering opinions, they were uncovering biological alignment. To ensure scientific rigor, researchers repeated the entire process with new groups of women, new cities, and new demographics. The results didn't drift. They tightened. Even when age, experience, cultural background, and relationship style varied dramatically, the chosen interval remained almost identical. This experiment exposed something crucial: women are far more aligned in their preferences than men imagine, and their alignment has nothing to do with cultural fantasies. It comes directly from the way the female body is constructed, where it bends, where it stretches, and where pleasure accumulates. The study didn't just reveal the ideal size. It revealed how predictable female comfort and pleasure actually are when you remove noise, myth, and pressure from the equation. When the final numbers were compiled, the research team realized they had captured something extremely rare in sexual science: consistency. Women didn't scatter across the extremes. They didn't drift unpredictably from one end of the spectrum to the other. Their choices concentrated around a specific interval, narrow, measurable, and firmly grounded in biological comfort. This was the moment the term ideal size became more than an opinion. It became a statistical fact. But what made the findings even more meaningful was how women described the sizes they selected. They didn't speak about them as impressive or visually striking. They spoke about them as functional. The preferred range wasn't chosen because it looked a certain way, it was chosen because it allowed the body to respond naturally during intercourse. When women picked the models inside the ideal interval, they used phrases like easy to relax with, fits with movement, consistent stimulation, doesn't interrupt arousal, comfortable for longer sessions. These weren't aesthetic judgments. They were physiological assessments. In other words, the ideal size wasn't about attraction, it was about performance. Women explained that sizes within this interval made it easier for the pelvic floor muscles to stay relaxed, which increased lubrication and sensitivity. They noted that the penis stayed in contact with key internal surfaces, especially the anterior vaginal wall, without overshooting into areas that caused discomfort. Rhythm became easier to maintain, and the body's natural arousal cycle flowed without interruption. Another fascinating insight came from comparing long-term versus short-term preferences. For casual encounters, women sometimes chose slightly larger models, not dramatically, but by small margins. But for long-term partners, the selection shifted back to the core interval almost every time. Why? Because longevity depends on compatibility, not spectacle. What feels impressive at first doesn't necessarily feel sustainable session after session. When the researchers charted these findings, the ideal range became unmistakable: a size that aligns with the natural depth of the vaginal canal, stimulates sensitive regions reliably, and avoids triggering protective reflexes. It's a size that promotes flow, not tension, connection, not caution. And here's the part most men never expect: the ideal size women selected is incredibly common. Millions of men already fall into this interval and have no idea they match the biological preference that emerged from one of the most thorough studies ever conducted. This was the moment the researchers realized they hadn't just mapped preference, they had mapped the intersection point between male anatomy and female physiology. A point where pleasure is not accidental, but predictable. Once researchers identified the ideal size range, the next step was unavoidable: what happens when a man's size falls outside of it? And here, the myths collapse faster than anywhere else. The findings showed that being below or above the preferred interval does not eliminate pleasure, but it does change how pleasure is created, how the body reacts, and what adjustments partners naturally make during intercourse. Let's start with the lower end of the spectrum. Men who fall below the preferred length aren't automatically at a disadvantage. In fact, researchers found several unexpected benefits: easier penetration at all angles, more freedom of movement, and less likelihood of triggering discomfort during deeper thrusts. Women described smaller partners as more adaptable, easier to sync with, and less likely to break rhythm. The primary challenge is consistent stimulation of the deepest sensitive zones, something that can be compensated with technique, angle variation, and pelvic control. Many women even reported that experiences with below-range partners were more pleasurable than those with larger men because comfort allowed them to relax fully. Now, the upper end of the spectrum, the group that many men assume has the natural advantage. The data told a very different story. Women frequently reported apprehension, tension, and difficulty relaxing with much larger partners. Not because of appearance, but because penetration became unpredictable. Even small changes in angle could push past the comfortable depth and collide with sensitive internal structures like the cervix. This triggered involuntary pelvic tightening, reduced lubrication, and a drop in arousal. Many women used phrases like "too intense," "I had to control every movement," or "I couldn't relax long enough to enjoy it." The challenge for above-range sizes isn't stimulation, it's management. These partners often have to limit depth, adjust rhythm, and be hyper-aware of positioning to avoid discomfort. Paradoxically, the very thing men believe gives them an advantage ends up creating more complexity, and sometimes more pressure, during intercourse. But the most important discovery was this: women described their most satisfying partners not by size, but by balance, the partner who understood their body, adapted naturally, and maintained rhythm without tension. A man outside the preferred range could outperform a man inside it simply by understanding how to work with female physiology rather than against it. In other words, being below or above the ideal size doesn't define the experience. What defines it is how well the couple navigates the body's architecture, comfort, rhythm, angles, pressure, and emotional ease. The ideal range provides a natural compatibility. But compatibility alone is not mastery. After mapping the preferred range, analyzing the extremes, and understanding the mechanics of female anatomy, researchers uncovered one final truth, a truth that changes the entire conversation. Women consistently choose their best sexual experiences not because of size, but because of how a man uses the body he already has. In the interviews that followed the physical and digital evaluations, women described details that went far beyond anatomy. They spoke about rhythm, not speed, but the pacing that matches their natural arousal curve. They talked about pressure, not force, but steadiness. They highlighted timing, responsiveness, and the ability to adjust instinctively without needing instructions. These are qualities rooted in awareness, not measurements. From a biological perspective, this makes perfect sense. The female body is highly reactive to emotional states. When a woman feels safe, desired, and understood, her pelvic floor relaxes, lubrication increases, and her internal tissues heighten their sensitivity. This relaxation is essential. It amplifies pleasure and expands her tolerance for deeper or more intense movement. A man with flawless dimensions cannot compete with a man who knows how to create this state of ease and connection. Women described their best partners as present, attentive, and coordinated, regardless of size. Some even said that partners outside the ideal range became unforgettable because they compensated with technique, communication, and confidence. What mattered wasn't what the man brought into the bedroom, it was what he did once he got there. Another factor women emphasized is consistency. Sex isn't a single movement repeated over and over, it's a sequence of micro-adjustments. The men who excelled were those who could maintain a rhythm without losing awareness of tension changes or comfort shifts. This ability comes from emotional intelligence and sexual maturity, qualities far more influential than anatomy. What this research ultimately proves is that size shapes compatibility, not outcome. A man inside the ideal range has an easier starting point. But a man outside it can surpass him through mastery of movement, communication, and the emotional environment he creates. And that mastery is fully within every man's control. If you want more insights like this, grounded in real science, explained with clarity, and aimed at improving your sexual health, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. If this video opened your eyes to the truth behind size and pleasure, like the video, and explore the other content here on the channel. There's a lot more that can elevate your confidence and performance. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.